going up? Is hiring going down? Is it remaining the same? And 56% of people who responded to the survey said that hiring was increasing. And in the pie chart, if I remember correctly, and we'll go through it as I said, that's still an increase over last year. So not only is hiring increasing and continuing to grow for this year, but if you compare it to last year, most companies responded that it was an increase, that it is even increasing over last year, which I thought was really interesting. So we're going to talk about that. So companies want to hire. That's a big theme of this work of this meeting. 7% of them reported that they don't care about the economy. And of course, I'm paraphrasing, but our question was, is the economy affecting your plans? Do you think you'll retract, that type of stuff? 77% of people who responded said no, they're moving forward with their plans as usual. 66% of the people who responded to the survey said that hiring is either challenging or significantly challenging. So we're going to talk about that today because I think that's a key point to talk about. And the main reasons, I think is this, I feel like I'm a broken record because these are the main reasons before the pandemic. So the pandemic has nothing to do with this anymore, in my opinion. And most of the things that we're seeing nationally and locally agree with that. It's not the pandemic, this is just regular business. Salaries and labor shortage. So those are our three areas. Oh, and by the way, my crack researcher, Miranda, who's also taping us right now, she did some comparisons to the national data. Our workforce in May retracted or shrunk by 250,000 people. So just think about that, how that affects us every single day. So we have to do everything that we can as employers to be top of mind, be as competitive as possible. I always want to tell everybody pay more, but that's not always the reality of the situation. So there's a lot of other things you can do to kind of combat that. They work said that there's no way they can do it. It's impractical for their business. So that trend that's gaining momentum, or at least it seems to be gaining momentum, may not really gain that much momentum. And regardless of what we think about it, the reality of the situation is most businesses don't think they can support it with whatever products or services or things that they're providing to the greater world. And then our remote hybrid work versus in-office everyday work, it remains steady. So last year, it wasn't a 50-50 split. There was about 50+% that were back to work pretty much every single day, no hybrid option, to like 46%. It was basically unchanged this year. It's the same exact dynamic. So I think the remote aspect and the hybrid aspect is here to stay, but it depends on your business model and what you can do. So now with that being said, because let's talk about, Jason's like, oh no.
They sat down first, and I was like, I guess I'm getting the first question.
So we talked last week as we were preparing for this, and my pants are sliding me around on this chair. If you see me move, it's because the chair and my pants are slippery. Anyway, on companies hiring and the other things that I just mentioned, what were your initial responses or your initial reaction to that?
Thanks, Miriam. Just first, thank you for having me here at the panel, and just to share a little bit more about myself so you understand kind of the lens from which I'm viewing these problems. I've been on my own independently for about a year now as a consultant, but before that I was in HR at GE for 11 years here locally, and then I was the HR director for Global Foundry. So I have a lot of kind of corporate HR experience at some of the bigger companies in the region. When I saw the survey results, firstly I was a little surprised in a good way because we're hearing so much in the news and everything about workforce issues and maybe the economy starting to recede a little bit, but then we saw these positive results on companies locally really still looking to invest and hire. And one of my thoughts was kudos to kind of the leadership in the region for investing in the industries that are doing well, like semiconductors, and clean energy, and gaming and technology. And so I think those industries are helping lift the entire economy here in the area. But another thing that I noticed was that, given the challenges, I think it's very consistent. And Manpower Group did a similar survey. They're a global firm, and they also found that 75% of companies are having difficulty filling roles, which I think is very consistent with what your survey's results are. So, and that number's 2x what it was 10 years ago. So if you go back to 2014, it was about 36%. So that's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So this idea of the skills gap, the labor shortage, I don't think it's going away. And maybe it gets worse from here. I think it's going to force companies to get a lot more creative in how they kind of approach these challenges.
In terms of salaries, skills gap, and labor shortages, you can't make more people on a quick level, right? I mean, how nice would that be? Salaries sometimes are governed by the finances of the business. Well, they are governed by the finances of the business and the revenue and all of those types of things. So if an organization can't make more people, and they can't raise salaries to be, 10,000 to 20,000 more than any other company that they're competing with. Talk a little bit about what companies should be probably looking at in terms of investing in developing the workforce. You had mentioned something when we talked last week about the forest of trees and the planting, and then what needs to be done now to make sure that we are addressing it, because this isn't going away. I think I've been talking about this since the mid 2015, 16, 17, 18s. I was on the radio, I was doing things on TV, talking about labor shortage, skills gap for years now. So share a little bit of the insights of what you think companies are doing or should be doing to try to address this.
Well, I think you said one point you made there is really relevant about salaries, and so I think a couple things are happening at once. One, you have the demographic shifts going on, right? So a lot of the baby boomers are retiring, so the workforce is shrinking quantitatively because of that. Then there's also a skills shift. So the skills needed are rapidly changing and shifting into other industries, and that's just going to keep happening more and more and more with how fast technology is going. So those kind of pools of people and different, call them worker categories, are getting smaller and then moving around very quickly. So I think companies kind of have to make a choice. Are you going to be the leader in pay and in salaries and benefits and everything, and attract people that way, a shrinking pool of people, but we're going to attract them because we're going to be the number one, most competitive in pay? Most companies aren't willing to kind of make that choice, right? So then your other option is somehow you have to invest in increasing that pool of labor, of talent. And that's going to take you a while. It's not going to be something that you can look at your open jobs this year and say, we're going to go and somehow make 20% more skilled technicians. It's something that you're going to have to invest in over time. And I think the companies that are doing this well are taking a longer time horizon on their talent efforts. So they're not just thinking about the jobs I have to fill now. They're using data, they're doing some workforce planning, and they're thinking about, in the next 3 to 5 years, how many technician jobs do I need to fill? And it doesn't have to be very complicated, right? If you want to get an investment in a long-term program, training program, apprenticeships, things like that, you're going to have some data. You're going to go to your business leader and say, I want to invest in this program. It's going to cost $10, $20, $100,000, whatever it is, but it's going to produce X number of people per year. So you have to have some data. You have to kind of look at it. And what I try and work with some of the companies that I work with on doing is just doing some basic modeling. It doesn't have to be very complex, but how many people on average per year do you lose to attrition? How much is your business going to be growing? And then how productive do you expect to be in terms of kind of becoming more efficient at what you're doing? If you take those three variables and you just mix them together, you can actually get a pretty good projection of how many people you're probably going to have to hire over the next few years. Then you can go to your business and you say, we've got this big problem here. How are we going to close this gap? Let's think about some of those solutions, and you're probably going to have a little bit better of an audience to kind of get some money to put into some of those development and training programs like we talked about.
So Jeff are aware of the Janelle Group and the energy they bring to the area, and the energy you even bring. And I know that the Janelle Group is looking at a couple of things, and I know that you develop talent internally. But talk a little bit about, share the program, or at least what you're trying to do with Schenectady High School in terms of getting exposure to that potential up-and-coming workforce.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, I just want to say that to me, looking through the survey results was validating in a sense, because as I sat down with our recruiting team as well, and I was like, where are we at in terms of these results, and it really is representative of where we're at as an organization. We are hiring in higher numbers than we have in the past. Our salaries are kind of holding steady at this point after doing a huge skyrocket through COVID. And then with the remote trends, we were very much kind of on pace there of like, yes, we're doing it, yes, it works, but actually we don't like it and we would like to have more people in person. So that was interesting and validating. In terms of talent development, so we're in an interesting space in a lot of ways. For years, we used to kind of joke that at Janelle, we don't find the best talent, we make the best talent. And we would say that because nobody knew who we were and the best talent didn't want to work for us. And so we had to get creative and scrappy, and we would pull people out of weird situations. Like we found a guy who was making subs at a deli, but he had an astrophysics degree. And Darren Janelle, who's like an incredible encourager and like visionary for potential, was like, I can work with that. Like, let's do it. So we've always like pulled people in and helped encourage them towards their best selves and equip them. And even taking students straight out of college, I always joke with people on day when I onboard employees. And in our industry, I'm sure it's prevalent across the board, but in tech industry, we talk a lot about imposter syndrome, especially with female engineers or with people of color, people that don't see themselves represented in that space, but even with like young white guy who came out of like a super affluent situation, has a master's degree and experience. They're sitting on my little blue couch where I provide unqualified counseling all day long, and they're saying to me basically, I don't know what I'm doing and I'm terrified I'm gonna get caught. And I try to lead up front by saying to people on day one, listen, fresh out of college, I tell every employee, we know that you don't know what you're doing. I just want to lead with that and let you know that the degree that you came here with is not enough for you to jump in and add value on day one as a software developer or a contributor on a software project. We hired you because we believe in you and because we want to support you and help you develop your career. And so we've always taken that approach of like, yeah, like we're here to partner with you and help you build. But when it comes to reaching people that we don't currently see in the industry in the numbers that we would like to see them, I'm just a huge believer in creating exposure and providing representation. As a woman who grew up in Schenectady, in an underprivileged, very challenging socioeconomic situation, I think back to my childhood and the exposure that I had to careers in tech. If you had given me a list of 1,000 careers and said you had to pick something to do with your life, I would start by removing anything that had to do with engineering to just chop that list down to something more manageable, because I didn't see myself as talented in that space. I never saw a single person that looked like me who did that work. I saw shift work. I saw people who did soul-sucking work they hated, but they showed up and did it because that's what you do. And so for me, I'm very, very passionate about creating exposure for people that, if you don't see representation, you don't see yourself in that role, can we at least show you what that role looks like and encourage you to give it a shot, encourage you to believe in yourself. So we partner with Schenectady High School, and David Preston is amazing. He's the principal over the STEM community. So Schenectady High is broken up into like Fine Arts House, STEM House, different kind of like core focuses. So we partner with the principal of the STEM house at Schenectady High, and we push him into assemblies at the school. We host field trips at our office. We attend, I spoke with Nadia earlier, who said she was also at Career Jam over there. And I'm just really passionate about exposing students to careers that they would otherwise not know existed, or if they did know it existed, they would count themselves out from. So if you have opportunity to do that, please join me in that cause. It's so powerful to do that. I have 2 daughters, one who graduated intern today. We kept them up until 10 p.m. on a school night to watch Caitlin Clark play basketball. I'm not a basketball fan in particular, but I was like, this is important for my girls to see a woman get a stage in an athletic field. Cricket just joined the Basketball Hall of Fame locally. She's something else. I'm sure you were watching that game. And it was magical to see my little girls, a 5-year-old, on the edge of her seat going, I want to be Caitlin Clark when I grow up. And if you think about it, young boys have had examples on platforms like that forever. And to just create that exposure really matters. It makes a difference in the dreams that kids latch onto and the spaces they see themselves entering. So it really means so much to me to get to do that for others.
Absolutely.
Could I just make a quick comment? I think that's, Jessie gave a great example of the longer time horizon, right? Because they're in high school, so that's 4 or 5 years before those,
Yeah.
students are going to be ready for the workforce, but they're working on the problem 5 years ahead of time to get that, that benefit down the line. So that's a great example of workforce development.
And I remember sitting in math class saying, like, when am I ever going to use this? Why does this matter? And even if I'm never going to use this math skill, we're able to connect. I'm super passionate also about connecting people with the meaning behind what you're asking them to do. With your workforce, like, if you're asking them to organize the supply closet, it doesn't matter what it is. If you can't attach greater meaning to it, like, does it matter, right? And if you can connect people with the purpose behind what you're asking them to do, you can really invigorate something, an interest and a desire to do well. And I just think we have an opportunity to do that for people.
So if you're not familiar with this, get familiar with it in addition to partnering with local educators, because their studies are showing, go back even further, don't start in high school. You have to start in elementary school and middle school, because it's who are the people in your neighborhood, what are people seeing, what are the students seeing, and more importantly, you have to get the parents exposed as well, because the kids will go home and get super excited about something that the parents may not even be aware of. I'm on the board for the foundation of Tech Valley High School here in the area. And Tech Valley High School, if you're not familiar, is a regional high school. So kids from all over the capital region come to school at Tech Valley High School. And one of the things I love about the program is the partnerships they have with the community and the business leaders in the community. It's called the Business Alliance. They are lockstep with the teachers at the school. We meet regularly to talk about what are you seeing in the world? How can we build curriculum to start training kids in high school and put things together, like putting a math project and an English project together to show how this would relate in the world. I do have a funny story though. When my kids were little and I went to a parent-teacher conference, a friend of mine who's also my daughter's teacher, I made sure she knew that I've never once used parallelograms in my work. But I have used other math, which is hilarious in itself. But just there are organizations out there, there are educators out there that are longing to partner with the business community to start this. I always tell educators, just ask. But at the same time, we should be looking for those opportunities too. So Jason,
I do not want to take your time.
please.
This is super quick. No, you're up. But this is a really interesting example of how open, especially the inner city schools are to partnership. They are so open and they are hungry for involvement from businesses. We have a student, she's incredible, Dakota Rivera from Schenectady High. Her sister-in-law works at Janelle Group and is a designer on our team. And when Dakota expressed an interest in design, we were like, Abby, you can spend X number of hours a week in training Dakota. She's flourishing. She's working on real-world projects. She's going into her senior year. And David Preston said, you know what? This is the best thing Dakota could invest in. They send her during school hours. She gets credits for coming to our office and working at Janelle Group. And we're paying her, and she's getting school credits. And it's just incredible how open they are to, depending on the situation, there's opportunity to give kids real world experience, and the school is saying, we value that and we appreciate the investment you're making in our students. So Jason,
Yes.
you.
No, I'm listening
There's
and learning.
there's so much to talk about in such a
So
little bit
much
of
to
time,
talk
right?
about.
So let's talk a little bit about your role. First, I want you to share your role in the community
Sure.
as with the chamber. But then I also want you to talk about, we talked a little bit last week when we met about, people often say that the people aren't out there, they can't find them. And I know we talked about, well, they're probably maybe not looking in the right places or creating those relationships. So talk a little bit about your role, but then also talk about what you're seeing from a workforce standpoint as it relates to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives for organizations. Because I think that this all kind of comes together.
Sure. Well, folks, I'm the Vice President for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion with the Capital Region Chamber, and I'm coming up on 5 years in that role. So we have been on an intentional journey ourselves, and I think you'll see it reflected if you go to our board page right now and look at the profiles and pictures of our board members. You will see we were not the chamber board we were 3 to 5 years ago. I think if you've come to any of our events, let's say the annual dinner, let's use that one, the biggest, we call it the chamber prom. The feel and the inclusion and the variety of sector of people, not only where they work, but a background is different than it was 3 to 5 years ago. And I think part of what we've all have been kind of tinkering around is, yes, there are pockets where populations are a challenge and where the numbers just aren't adding up, like we're not making enough babies. But then I think that there's this other challenge. Some I think are accepting the challenge. But then I think there's this other, it's a yes and, it's a both, right? I think yes, we have like demographic, they call it the silver tsunami, right? The number of people retiring is a tsunami and the number of people coming into the workforce is not equaling up. But I also think, Miriam, we have, to the point that Jessie was talking about, and Jordan, like there could be relationships where there aren't any. And there could be efforts and initiatives where there aren't any to find people, to pull them out of the dark, the shadows, to help proactively eliminate the barriers that they're already facing pre-COVID, and maybe some were exacerbated through COVID. So I think, yes, some of the demographic mega trends are dismal, but I also think what's promising is that there are people, there are pockets of people. Heck, we have asylum seekers in this region, right? What businesses are actually trying to craft an on-ramp for these asylum seekers to get gainful employment at their organizations, right? I think it's a matter of, if you don't feel like a certain sector of our demographic is included or represented, you have to build that ramp. You have to, as Jordan said, play the long game of investing in that relationship. And I think just using the chamber as an example, we've started to do some of that, and it's just now 5 years into really leaning into this work, revealing itself in the types of programs, initiatives we do, and the people who show up. So I think it's when you don't see the pipeline that you'd like, achieving the goals that you would like, we have to craft another pipe, and we have to get a new flow of talent into that pipe. And I think that's, if when you're experiencing challenges you've never experienced, it requires to bring solutions that you've never thought of before, right? Bring something new to the thinking. So I think it's all goes, the one example of reaching out to Schenectady High, Ellis Medicine has the Schenectady Promise, where Ellis Hospital is 2 miles from Schenectady High School, and they said, why are we spending tens of thousands of dollars out of this region trying to attract talent when we have a graduating class? So they have it's called the Ellis Promise, where they will guarantee any student that shows up with a high school diploma, they will find them a way to get them employed. And hospitals obviously have lots of different roles to fill, but that's one other regional example of a hospital realizing the challenges that they have and saying, why are we looking over here when we have hundreds of students graduating every June from this right in our region? So they created that on-ramp. So I think that that's part of the work that where you don't have a relationship, start forming one. Where I was speaking today with someone in the room where you haven't shown up to community events before. Juneteenth this past weekend, that was an opportunity to show up and start to become a more familiar, more visible, more friendly face to a section of the community where you might not have as strong of a relationship. And some of that, it's not going to yield the talent right away, but you become more of a familiar face with these communities, you become more of a familiar brand and name, and now people are saying, oh, I can see myself applying there. I have a friend that works there. So one of the books that I brought and I gave to Jessie was, we host a summit, our biggest DEI event of the year, and a couple of years ago for our virtual event, we hosted this woman from Minneapolis, and Minneapolis is ground zero for George Floyd, right? So her firm was involved in some of the everything that happened after George Floyd. But the title of her book is Colorful: Top Strategies to Attract and Retain Top Talent of Color. And literally her chapter 2 is I can't seem to find any qualified talent, of color. And then she, that's the title, but then she goes on in the chapter to kind of give you strategies to debunk that. So, in some level, on some sense, folks are there. We just need to be more creative about, again, engaging them, assessing the barriers that they've already faced in employment, be proactive about removing those. The Department of Civil Service has eliminated the need to take a civil service exam for many of their positions. Again, they're calling it Open New York, I think, right? Where it's like, you no longer need to be on this long civil service list to get a role with the state. So these are some of the, the ways that sectors are reacting to some of the challenges that we are having.
Absolutely. Just really briefly, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what you're seeing in the DE&I space from a trend perspective. I think we're all very familiar with the huge awareness that was created in 2020. It was 2020, right?
2020, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
We were all on
It's
pandemic.
like a big blur,
Right,
that
no.
whole time period. But, so everybody was like, DEI,
Yes.
we're gonna make a whole group, we're so committed, we're gonna do all these things, and
Where
now
are they
fast
today?
forward.
Yeah. It's a little.
It's kind of gotten a little bit, what I'm seeing in the broader press is people firing or letting go of those groups or not continuing to grow those programs. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing here locally, because I think who cares about what everybody else is doing, what are we doing? And why is it still so important? Because if you need to attract people to your organization, you gotta do everything.
Yes.
But you gotta be committed to it. You have to be genuine and authentic. So share just a little bit about what you're seeing out there and what companies are doing.
We can have 45 minutes on just that question alone.
I know,
But
sorry.
what I'm seeing, I think, I'll try to get as many thoughts out that I have rattling in my head. One, I do think that this work had been going on for decades in some sectors, but when the death of George Floyd happened, we were all on quarantine, right? We couldn't turn away. I think folks, even leaders of organizations who were on the fence about DEI, when they saw this man's life being squeezed from his body, said, that's wrong, something needs to be done about that. And it led to more social awareness, which then trickled into boardrooms as well. And I, as a practitioner, had seen engagement at levels of organizations where, maybe the engagement amount was there, but who I was engaging with was now at C-suite level and above, being invited to come talk to, senior leadership, that kind of thing. But now, you're right, Miriam, the interest seems to be waning. And it's like Zoom as a company let go of their entire DEI department. We're seeing that kind of thing. And then I think these high profile cases, some playing out in higher ed, but a business is wondering, is it going to have ramifications for business sector as well? If folks don't know, a group of Asian students felt like the admissions processes at some schools disproportionately favored Black and brown students of color versus them as Asian students, and their case made it all the way up to the Supreme Court and was ruled in favor, basically saying that these admissions practices were discriminatory. And so now that has opened the door for, there's another case right now, Walter and I were talking about, two very successful, wealthy African-American women, venture capitalists, want to be able to fund other women of color, entrepreneurs, but that kind of laser focus that they would like for their money is being challenged to use it in that way, because it's the reverse discrimination kind of argument, which is actually not a thing. But what I'm seeing is, yes, I think we're starting to see who's really about the work, like who was just box checking in 2020 and who is still embedding that meaningfully in their work. Yes, I think DEI as a field is going to need to evolve and change. Unfortunately, it has become so politicized, and I think that's part of the pushback that we see. That, even when I introduce myself as the VP of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, I sometimes see a reaction to that. Like, why do we need a role like that? So I think that is unfortunate. I feel like that's only going to get worse going into November. DeSantis calls DEI discrimination, exclusion, and indoctrination. So when you have that narrative out there, folks that have no idea what being a DEI practitioner actually is, and when I can say, like, I don't discriminate, exclude, or indoctrinate. I come in, I take a look at what you're already doing in your business, and then try to bring a lens of inclusion to that. But I think it's important, so those are some of the trends. And then the second part of your question was, I think this is very much an employees market. So employers
are trying like hell not to make that be the case, don't you think?
This is very much an employees market, and I think when you couple that with the reality that, listen folks, the overall profile of the typical American is getting younger and browner every day. I'll say that again, the overall profile of what an average American looks like is getting younger and browner every day, but our boardrooms are not reflecting that. So we've got to start taking those long-term investments and realizing that with an employees market, with the demographics being younger and browner, like we've got to adjust our recruiting strategies. It's just flat out like, you're going to be competing for the limited talent. What are you going to do to be a differentiator? And I think not only is it an employees market, but these younger job seekers are very savvy. And if DEI is important to them, let's not even call it DEI. If being able to wear the hair how they want to wear in the workplace, if being able to come in and have themselves reflected on senior leadership, if being able to come in and be able to observe different holidays that are not Christian-centric is important to that student or that applicant, and you don't have those features or allow that in your workplace, they can easily in this market move on to the next person that's hiring that will have those things. So we have to begin, again, DEI, I think folks look at it as some regulatory, I'm gonna come in and oversee and hold you accountable. And yes, there's some of that, but DEI is also like a tool that can be leveraged, right? It's a tool. Use it to your advantage. Use it as a way to say, this is what we're doing, and this is how, by doing this, we're differentiating our sector and ourselves compared to our competitors. And I think that for this younger workforce population, who these things matter to them, when they hear those things, that you have ERGs at your organization, those kinds of things, that's gonna have the antennas go off in the interview process in a way that might not if you don't. So, if you haven't begun to start to think about those things, don't look at DEI as some woke agenda thing that you have to do, where you're being told what to do. Use it as a tool to your advantage to say, we have this table that we're trying to, proactively construct to make it more inclusive for different people so that we can attract more folks to our organization.
Walter and I say this all the time, that can we just be good humans? I mean, it's kind of like common sense, good human values, I guess.
Right.
Who cares about all of the politics and the religion? Let's just be kind and fair,
Yes.
and good to each other.
And my last point, diversity, equity, and inclusion as a profession might be evolving and needing to change, but diverse people are not going anywhere. Like, the actual people that we're talking about are not gonna go anywhere, and some communities are growing. So think what you will politically about the profession of DEI, and take all the talking points you want about the profession and the work. Okay, put that aside. People are not going anywhere, and we as employers and sectors have to be able to wrap our arms around that in a way that's, conducive for the employer and the employee.
Could I just add, and I think what Jason's saying really resonates with me, because I think we're seeing, companies having to kind of separate, are we in it for the social issues, which, there's 100 good reasons to be in it for that, versus the business imperative that it is, which is needing to get the most talent that we can and make an inclusive environment that's going to attract and retain that talent. And I think, the companies who are going to approach it that way, the second way, are going to stick with it, and they're going to be the ones you're going to see continue to take action on that. And not just because it's the right thing to do, but because they really need to do that, for the sake of their success.
And it's the right thing to do, so it's a win-win, right?
That's right.
Oh,
There's the moral case and the business case.
There is a business case, and for years we have been seeing study after study and statistic after statistic, try to say that fast, that companies companies who invest in this are seeing greater returns. They are seeing higher productivity, higher profitability, higher revenue. Like, hello.
Yes, and it allows you to reach out, to you onboard one member of a community. It's a great, the reason why there's such a strong Guyanese population in Schenectady. It's because one, from what I understand, from Queens, this pastor from a church realized that for the cost of a home down in Queens, I could have 3 homes up here in Schenectady, and he came up here, started his church, started to buy homes, and then slowly started to bring his cousins and his aunts, and then little by little, people from Guyanese backgrounds are like, oh, Schenectady's a place where we can go start a life.
You gotta fact check me on this, but as a Schenectady native,
Yeah.
I remember growing up and hearing stories about Al Drzezinski was the mayor at the time, and the buzz was that Mayor Drzezinski was selling broken down property. He had worked with the banks and all
Yes.
this. There were all these foreclosed properties in depressed neighborhoods, and they were selling them, incentivizing Guyanese people to move here, and they were selling these homes for $1 or whatever, nothing, because they knew that in general, the Guyanese population takes great pride in the quality of their homes. And so that's why you've seen, you drive by and you see bright flags and beautiful yards full of flowers, and the homes have been restored, and it was very strategic. And they were like, how are we gonna, it's just a very interesting example of leaning in and saying, this is a win-win.
Right.
How can we create opportunity and we're all gonna flourish
and
when we do that.
spread opportunity. There was a moment maybe 4 years ago where I was the only non-white staff member, and we're at 7 or 8 now. So again, the noise will start to resonate with folks if you make it.
All right, so we only
Well,
let
if you guys want to continue and I bounce, I'll be so sad to leave you guys.
Let's talk a little bit about it.
Yeah.
So when I think global foundries, I think GE, I think other advanced manufacturing or manufacturing industrial settings, even healthcare, obviously. You can't have a remote work environment. My husband jokes, because he's like, they're not bringing the machines to my house for me to build them. I gotta go to work. He hates that, by the way. So in terms of that trend, is there an opportunity first for employers that really can't offer that? What could they be doing, or what might we be thinking about, and give maybe some potential best practices of what you're seeing? And I know obviously shift work might play into that, some flexibility type stuff might play into that. But just really quickly, just to keep us on time, and just real fast.
Yeah. So quick, 1 minute. I think firstly there's opportunities even in manufacturing for remote work if you split it down to the task level and say what is the work that's being done here that actually has to be done on the site, at the location versus not. And that's where I think we're going to see a lot of change in the years ahead on stripping out those pieces of work and allowing that work to be done, frankly, anywhere in the world, right? And there's going to be real pros and cons to that. But there's an advantage to doing work that needs to be done locally, because that also helps your job security. But I think what people really want is flexibility. Even in a manufacturing environment, you can have flexibility. You can have compressed work weeks. You can have custom shifts. You can have ability to flex time in and out. You can have more pooled time off. So there's still ways to offer that flexibility, and to not have this world of the haves and the have-nots, of the people in the office who get to work from home and the people in the factory floor who don't. The key is to find out what's important to them and how can we give them a little bit more flexibility and balance in their lives.
I think people are so used to customizing every aspect of their life. I think, this generation, their entire life is customizable, from the apps on their phone to the colors on, their sneakers, to everything, right? And I think that's, if you don't have remote, how are you going to customize that flexibility in a way? And so, we have 1 o'clock Fridays between Memorial Day and Labor Day. And so
we're doing beach.
Yeah.
By the way, one other thing quickly. Also, how about the idea of making the workplace someplace people want to be?
Thank you.
Right.
If you put more services, a nicer environment, and say, well, maybe I'd like to come into the office a few days a week.
Yeah.
So we invest heavily in that at Janelle Group, and that's my full role is to try to make work a place that people want to show up to. But even still, we have our workforce is 40% truly remote around the country and around the world, and then the 60% that are local, most of them choose to work a hybrid schedule. Some are fully remote, which I don't understand personally. I always joke, I am passionately in person. I am an in-person person. And it is just so interesting to see. I feel like there's been such a huge shift where people really value the flexibility. I value the flexibility. Look, I'm out of the office right now, and then I'm heading to my daughter's graduation, then I gotta go to the bank after, like, I've got flexibility, you know? And I love it, and I want that for everybody, but I do feel like one thing that I can try to focus on is the fact that in a world where people are moving more and more and more and more remote and isolated, in so many ways, it's not just in our workplaces, our lives are becoming more isolated. And work, in my view, is one of the final captive audiences where we have access to people. People are lonely, and I can get into major details and statistics and information about it. People are lonely. The U.S. Surgeon General put out an 82-page paper titled Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation. And loneliness is literally killing people. If you look it up, it's fascinating and heartbreaking. And so what I try to lean into is the fact that work is a place where, whether they're in person or virtual, people have to show up. It's one of the last places where people have to show up. They've lost their third places in society, like those places besides work and home where we congregate. People are just more isolated. And so I try to use every opportunity, virtually or in person, to connect with the person behind the human resource, right? And to, like, I just am passionate about that and hope that everybody will join me in that. When you're dealing with people, just treat them kindly and try to give them space to, like, air out their anxieties about the work that they're dealing with or whatever, because people are struggling out there. And so take care of them.
All right, with that, I'm going to say thank you so much.